It's time to assemble the tribes. The Darkoath are going to war. Welcome to War Games on Toast, all of you lovely people. It's me, it's Toast, and today we are looking at the brand new Darkoath. The September FAQ has added so much new content, and one of the highlights of that is the brand new Darkoath and their supplemental side faction, the brand's Oathbound. In this video, I am just going to look at the core Darkoath, and in a separate video, I will look at brand's Oathbound, so keep an eye out for that. But before we get all hyperbolic about the new Darkoath, it's time for a little bit of shilling.
I am shocked. Shocked. Well, not that shocked.
Please consider leaving a like, a comment, and subscribing, as that helps me fight against the dastardly YouTube algorithmic demon. And if you want to help in a more tangible way, then please consider signing up to my YouTube members or my Patreon, like all of these wonderful people on screen now. Badoosh. And if you don't want to dedicate yourself to a monthly subscription but still want to help the channel out, then feel free to throw me a coffee. But with all of that out of the way, let's get on with the show.
And now for something completely different.
So the Darkoath are finally here. I am a massive fan of the models. I've always loved the Marauder theme, and they're here. It's so cool, and I've had a quick look through already, so this is more of a second impression, but there's some good stuff on here, and I am very, very excited to check it out. So starting with their reaction, it is called Glorious Death, and it's quite a doozy. Fighters with the Beast rune mark cannot make this reaction, which is quite important to note. A fighter can make this reaction when they are targeted by a melee attack action after damage is totaled, but before it is allocated to this fighter. If it is enough for this fighter to be taken down, gain a double with a value of 1. If this fighter has the hero rune mark, gain a triple with a value of 1 instead. If this fighter is favoured, gain a quad with a value of 1 instead. Glorious Death is really, really cool. It's a reaction that you will likely try to use quite a bit, but it won't necessarily always pay off. There's a lot of really easy counterplay to this, namely just attacking things that have already activated so they can't make the Glorious Death reaction. Another way around this is if your guys die at the end of the turn, then your dice kind of get wasted, right? So there are a lot of fairly easy counterplays to this, but then again, your opponent is highly incentivized to kill your models before you activate, so you lose activations on that battle round. So it is a bit of a double-edged sword as to whether or not your opponent will actually want to play around this. But if this does go off, this is incredible value. Having more resources than your opponent is always a good thing, and you will nearly always have more resources than your opponent because your chaff will die, your leaders will die, and if you ever get favoured, a mechanic we'll get into in just a moment, then your opponent's actually incentivized to not kill them because you get a free quad. And sure, it's a value of 1, but a quad is a quad, right? So it's very interesting, especially when your favoured models are more powerful than your non-favoured counterparts. And I think there's going to be a whole lot of tactical nuance in play when dealing with Glorious Death. It is another on-death reaction, but there's nothing quite like this one. It's really, really cool. But moving on to the Oath of Murder. This is their first double, and this is like the core of their theme. It is arguably the most important ability in Darkoath because it triggers all kinds of extra benefits. One, their reaction gets better, but also nearly every other ability, if not every ability in this list, is more powerful if you manage to pull off the Oath of Murder. So, fighters with the Beast rune mark cannot use this ability. After using this ability, this fighter is oathed for the rest of the battle. After an enemy fighter is taken down during an oathed fighter's activation, that fighter is no longer oathed and is instead favoured for the rest of the battle. After a friendly fighter becomes favoured, gain a double with a value of 1. Oath of Murder is phenomenal if you use it correctly and go into a game with the intention to not use it too often. There's a few things to unpack here. Firstly, when you use Oath of Murder, it lasts for the rest of the battle, so you want to pop your oaths as early as possible, Get these done on turn 1 when you have nothing else better to do, and make sure to leave a marker next to those models so you know which models are oathed and which models are not. Ideally, you're looking to get 1 or 2 oathed models to become favoured on turn 2 or turn 3, so on turn 3 or turn 4, you're at full power with your best models. Now, of course, landing kills is always unreliable, but the Darkoath do have some incredibly powerful options that become unbelievably good when you do trigger this, so bear that in mind. The final benefit is that Oath of Murder is almost free. If you go in with the assumption you are going to use Oath of Murder twice and trigger it twice, then those doubles get refunded later in the game. It's basically like making an investment. If you make the oath and you succeed, you get the dice back later on, which will allow you to have really powerful turns on the turn you trigger your oath, which is really, really cool. And again, when combined with their reaction, which gives you even more dice, the Darkoath have a uniquely powerful selection of resources to deal with, and it's really, really cool, and I love this theme. It's very similar to the Darkoath Savage's Wild Dice mechanic, but much more powerful. Moving on to Swift Attacker. This ability can only be used after an activation in which this fighter used a move action, and that move ended within 1 inch of an enemy fighter. This fighter makes a bonus ranged attack action that must target an enemy within 1 inch. If this fighter is favoured, add the value of this ability to the damage points allocated by each hit and critical hit from that ranged attack action. So Swift Attacker sounds really good on paper, and it is actually quite good because it's a double and you get a free attack action with a lot of restrictions to that attack action. The issue with Swift Attacker is that the effect is on a model that isn't actually that good at dealing damage. It's like a 2-3-1-3 javelin throw, and you have to get within 1 inch to use it. And sure, if you do become favoured, the damage can skyrocket on this bonus attack action, but it's a lot of setup for not that much gain. It's unlikely you will get this off, and whilst a unit that can use this is actually very, very handy, I would not go in with the assumption that you will ever get favoured. I wouldn't even burn Oath of Murder on this unless I was specifically going to kill someone who was really low on wounds to begin with, like chipping away the last few wounds on something that was on death's door to begin with. So just to reiterate, this ability is very handy, but just don't go in thinking you'll get favoured every game. It's going to be fairly unlikely, but if you do, it does open up some really interesting options. On to the next double, we have Raider's Tenacity, and this is another mounted unit's ability similar to Swift Attacker. Remove a number of damage points from this fighter up to half the value of this ability. If this fighter is favoured, remove an additional 3 points from this fighter. So Raider's Tenacity is really interesting. It's on a fairly durable mounted piece that has pretty bad attack stats, but it's also pretty good at just mulching through some low value chaff. So it's fairly reliable if you go looking for it to get your Oath of Murder trigger and then becoming favoured. And when you are favoured, you become much harder to kill because your movement 10 fast moving cavalry piece can now heal 3 flat damage plus a potential extra 3 twice per turn if you're just waiting, right? Which makes it a very fast and semi-durable objective grabby piece. It's also quite good at taking treasure in that instance too. So again, this is another good ability that's situational and requires setup to get the most out of, but I do like it quite a lot. And the model that can use it, which I'll put on screen now, but every time, Badoosh, is quite cool. So it's definitely worth remembering. It's definitely worth considering. And in the right matchup, definitely trigger that favorite. If there's a bunch of like low value like skinks or skeletons or spiders, right, snakes even, I guess, then yeah, you will trigger Raider's Tenacity, you'll put on Oath of Murder, you will buff this up, and you'll be almost unkillable. It'll be fantastic. You'll have a really good time once favored, and even when not favored, healing D3 in the midst of combat, it's always pretty good, right? On to their first triple, we have one of the key themes of the Darkoath, and I like this quite a lot. It's called War Leader, and basically their chieftains can use this. You pick a visible friendly fighter with the Darkoath rune mark within 6 inches of this fighter that has not activated yet this battle round. You can activate this fighter immediately after this fighter ends. If this fighter is favoured, pick up to 2 other friendly fighters with the Darkoath rune mark. until the end of the battle round, each fighter you picked, including the first, can use the Inspiring Presence ability without needing or using any ability dice. So War Leader is already quite interesting because it's basically Inspiring Presence, but better. You can pick a guy, then that guy can pick another guy, so you basically get 3 back-to-back activations. If you become favored though, then this becomes bonkers, because then you have your guy who goes, who then makes another guy go, who then makes another guy go, but you also make 2 more guys who can individually make 2 more guys go. It's just the amount of dudes who can go back to back. You can have your entire warband go in just back to back to back to back and perform some incredible solitaire plays and really force a situation. Sure, it can backfire, and then your opponent can then activate a whole bunch of guys afterwards if you run out of guys, and then that can lead to some really bad situations. But if you really need to get something done, War Leader lets you do that unimpeded. It's really powerful in the right situation, and because it's a triple and it provides so much power in activation, it's really good, even without favored. But when you do become favored, it becomes unbelievably good. And you know, the Chieftains are some of your best combat fighters. They're not the best, but they are also fairly solid. Again, these guys are really good at just mulching through chaff, low value, maybe mid-range stuff, right? This is a theme of the Darkoath, which you'll see very quickly once we get onto the actual units. They are very good at mulching through low to mid-value stuff. They will struggle against elites, and this is where Oath of Murder and all their favoured stuff is going to really start falling apart. But War Leader by itself is already a strong ability. It just gets even better in the right matchups. I'm a huge fan of this, but not as much of a fan as I am of Rally the Tribes. Each friendly fighter with the Darkoath rune mark and the Warrior rune mark within 6 inches of this fighter makes a bonus move action. If this fighter is favoured until the end of the battle round, each of those fighters also count as 1 additional fighter when determining which player controls objectives. So Rally the Tribes is outstanding in ways that are immediately obvious, right? Most bonus move based AoE abilities will affect a set number of guys, but no, Rally the Tribes affects everybody if they've got the Warrior rune mark, which for the record is basically all your Marauders and the Marauder champions. So all of your chaff, all of the core of your warband that's going to be holding objectives are going to be moving for free on a triple. That's a lot of guys moving up the board at once. And if you get favoured, they all count as additional fighters. Darkoath have some really solid chaff, bam bam. So this is just outstanding. If you can get favoured, being able to hold objectives, being able to take objectives easier, and also move onto objectives for free, get in the positions to get your chaff into combat with their chaff to start smacking them for 2 actions. The value here is unbelievable. Like the model that can use this is the Darkoath War Queen, and you will almost always take her in your lists because this ability is unbelievably powerful. The amount of action economy you get is staggeringly high. It is crazy powerful, and when you have access to multiple ways to gain bonus dice, making a triple is far less impactful in Darkoath than it might be in other factions who might want to make more doubles than anything else, right? So it's just such a good ability. I can't say enough positive things about Rally the Tribe. It is crazy, crazy powerful, but it's not as powerful, or it's not as bonkers as their final ability, which is the most bonkers ability I think Games Workshop have ever put to paper. This is actually insane. I'll go into it after I've read it out. Just brace yourselves. Quad, Eye of the Dark Patron. You can pick a visible friendly fighter with the Darkoath rune mark within 6 inches of this fighter. That is not activated yet this battle round. You can activate that fighter immediately after this fighter's activation. Then you can pick a visible enemy fighter within 6 inches of this fighter and roll 6 dice. For each 4+, allocate a number of damage points to that fighter equal to half the value of this ability, rounding up. In addition, add 2 to the attack's characteristic of melee attack actions made by this fighter until the end of their activation. So first things first, this ability is absolutely insane, but Also, there's been a lot of confusion on who gains all these buffs. Who gains the attack buff? Who gains the damage bursty thing, right? It's the Wilder Fiend. So the Wilder Fiend is the model that can use this ability, and he gains the attack buff, he gains the damage burst. And that's because this fighter, which is mentioned many, many times in this ability, for example, add 2 to the attacks characteristic of melee attacks made by this fighter, or then you can pick a visible enemy fighter within 6 inches of this fighter, right? It's referencing the Wilder Fiend because of the first part. You can pick a visible friendly fighter with the Darkoath rune mark within 6 inches of this fighter. This fighter is specifically referencing the activating model, the model who is using the ability, right? So, confusion out the way, all the cool stuff happens to the Wilder Fiend. So onto the ability. This ability is actually crazy. Being able to activate another guy immediately after your Wilder Fiend goes, buffing your attacks, being able to do a massive amount of burst damage within 6 inches, so we can target something over there, attack something over here, get this guy here, add something over there. There's all kinds of incredible plays with this, and as we'll see again, I'll put it on screen now, the Wilder Fiend's very, very powerful. This quad is outstanding. It does everything you'd want a quad to do, because it does everything. It's just a bunch of separate abilities that all just melt together into one uber ability. It's not particularly creative. It is just a bunch of effects piled onto one thing. I guess it is somewhat thematic if you assume that the Wilder Fiend uses this and just gets blessed with a whole bunch of power from their Dark Patron, their god, right? And that's kind of cool, even if it is a little bit bonkers. But yeah, this ability is just, it's insane. You would likely use this over Rampage every single time. If you have a high quad, then the burst damage, where you do, on 4+, you do like half value damage, right? You can do some incredible stuff with that. You're looking at like an average of like 9 damage if you have a quad 5 or a quad 6. And obviously you spike all the way to 18. So if you can pop that, do a massive burst of damage, and then attack a whole bunch of times, and your friend gets to go, it's just good. It's so obviously good. But overall, as a package, the Darkoath has some absolutely fantastic abilities here, and I'm really excited to use them. And that goes doubly so because I actually am a big fan of their units as well. We're going to start from the top left and then just go down, and then go to the right and go down. So Darkoath Chieftain on Warsteed. For 220 points, this guy is quite expensive. However, he does have the ability to make a bunch of guys activate. He's also one of our better killers with a 4425 profile. He's got 28 wounds, which is very, very high. He's movement 10, which is really, really nice. He is only toughness 3, which is a little bit, right? A little bit, but he's not too expensive for what he brings, and his ability is quite powerful. He is likely to be one of the guys who will trigger the Oath of Murder, because he is so fast. He can get to where you want him to be, and he can start mulching through some lower tier stuff. And he's accompanied by his friend, the regular Darkoath Chieftain, who is a lot cheaper, has the same attack profile, but is a lot slower, and has a lot less wounds, but he does gain +1 toughness. Both are fine. If I was to take a Darkoath Chieftain at all, I would likely take the one on foot, because I think there are better mounted options than the Chieftain on Warsteed. If I was to take the Warsteed, I would either give him +4 wounds, +1 toughness, or +1 strength to make him better at killing, or to make him a little bit more survivable. One of the big strengths of the Darkoath Chieftain on Warsteed is that he is tanky enough to kind of just run onto an objective with some lower tiered stuff and just kind of like be a pain, tank an objective, and just start bapping through their lower tiered stuff. That's quite an interesting use case for him, and yeah, I can see that working pretty darn well. But I think the much cheaper foot variant is likely to be the better choice. Now the Darkoath War Queen is something altogether. She's just built different. The Darkoath War Queen is like the Darkoath Chieftain, but better in most ways. She has +1 attack, but -1 crit, but also gains +1 toughness, and is 15 points more expensive. She is just simply put wonderful. She gains access to Ride of the Tribes, so all of her marauders get to move for free. She is a almost must take. If you don't take the War Queen, I think you are losing out on so much utility, and she's also the toughest model in the whole warband who isn't called a Wilder Fiend, right? She's the toughest human in the Darkoath being toughness 5, 20 wounds. Everybody else is toughness 3 or toughness 4. She is wonderful at her points cost. You'd almost always take her. I wouldn't even give her a blessing. If I was to give her a blessing though, maybe a point of strength to make it a bit easier for her to nab those kills. Maybe a point of damage if I was being a little bit saucy, right? But overall, Darkoath War Queen is kind of wonderful. You want to get into combat early and get something killed as quickly as possible, because once you do, she becomes unbelievable. So yeah, very, very good model. Next up, we have the Fell Rider Champions, and these are, again, kind of fine. I personally just wouldn't bother taking them because they're just not good enough, really. 145 points is an absolutely fine point value to be at. These guys are totally fine. For 20 wounds, movement 10, right? The javelins get a swift attacker. The axe variants gain Raider's tenacity, so the melee variants are more tanky, and the Fell Rider champions are a bit more pokey, right? For their points, they are fine. They are both decent in melee combat with a 4-3-1-3 or a 5-3-1-3, and the javelin being 2-4-1-3 is kind of okay for chipping away. It's not great, to be fair, but at movement 10 with a 10-inch range, it's acceptable. And again, their points aren't that high. The issue with the champions is that I would rather just take regular Darkoath Fell Riders because they are substantially cheaper. A Darkoath Fell Rider is just as good as a Darkoath Fell Rider champion with a javelin in melee, and is 35 points cheaper and only really loses 2 wounds, right? And in a similar vein, the Darkoath Fell Rider with Javelin is just as good as the Darkoath Fell Rider in melee, but gets a range attack, right? And again, 125 points, 110 points. These guys are so much cheaper, and they only really lose out on their wounds. And I guess you'd say that the Javelin loses out on a point of strength. I would go as far as saying that most lists should likely try to fit in one basic Darkoath Fell Rider and maybe push to give him +4 wounds. Give him 22 wounds and just have him be a really annoying, harassing force on the battlefield, because movement 10 is always good. Movement 10 at this points cost is even better. Get him to annoy objectives, get him to grab treasures, get him just to be a general pain in the ass. He's not going to kill much. His stats are not great defensively or offensively, but that speed is very, very useful. You can do all kinds of things with a model this cheap and this fast. I'm a big, big fan of the Darkoath Fell Rider. If you want to get a little bit spicy, take the champion with Javelin if you really want to use Swift Attacker and really want to try and nab those massive Swift Attacker favored kills. I wouldn't bank on that. I would just go with the Fell Rider, because then you also get to heal, which is also very, very handy. Going on to their champions, we have the Marauder champion and the Marauder champion with Spear, and these are fine. They're not great, honestly. 5-3-1-3 is not fantastic. 4-3-1-3 is also not fantastic. Sure, toughness 4, 18 wounds is quite nice. I'm okay with that. That's a nice little stat line they're packing there in terms of their defenses, but their damage is a little bit low. If you want something a little bit tankier though, something that can take a hit that isn't like, you know, a War Queen, or if you just want a really cheap leader to spam things out, then sure, I think the Marauder champions will definitely fill that role. And they still have the Warrior Rune Mark. They still get buffed by the Darkoath War Queen. They definitely have use. The issue is their damage output is very, very low, and their strength is very, very low too. These guys will likely get killed by other models in their price range because they just don't have enough going for them offensively, which is a shame. But they have their uses. Don't worry about that. Now, the stars of the show here are the Darkoath Marauders. These guys are like Marauders from Slaves to Darkness, but better. In terms of raw stats, I mean, ability-wise, they don't have one. And the Marauders in Darkoath have heals and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of raw stats, these guys are fantastic. 4-3-1-3 or 3-3-1-3 at 70 points with 10 wounds, toughness 4, movement 4 is really, really good. These guys are just really solid. I like these guys a lot. If I was to take any of them, I would likely take the Spears because I really value range 2. However, because the War Queen is getting you into combat with her her movement ability, then the regular Marauders, if you want to be a bit more aggressive, do fill the role of being more aggressive better, because 4 attacks is 4 attacks, a fairly high number of attacks, even if the damage and strength is a little bit low. Overall, these Marauders are fantastic. Overall, these Marauders are fantastic, and you will absolutely spam the absolute hell out of these. These guys are your backbone. You want these guys to be your main objective holders, your main objective grabbers, especially in conjunction with the War Queen, who you will absolutely be taking. She's way too good not to take. But then we get to the star of the show, the real murder boy himself, the Wilder Fiend. Now, this guy is 300 points, which is very expensive. But for his cost, he is incredibly well statted. Movement 6 is fantastic. Toughness 5 is wonderful. 35 wounds is just hard to chew through. 6, 5, 3, 4 is such a powerful profile. That is so many attacks at such a solid strength with such a good, tight damage profile. If I was to bless this guy, I would slap on +1 strength if I had to. I would even go a little bit wild and maybe even give him +1 damage for a bit of fun. Make him a 6-5-4-4. That just sounds like a good time. But dude, the Wilder Fiend is unbelievably good. He can't Oath of Murder. He can't do their reaction when he dies. But he does have that quad. And frankly, just using Onslaught's good enough too, right? The Wilder Fiend is just outstanding. If you take the Wilder Fiend, you are losing out on a lot of your model count. He is a third of your warband almost. But he gives you the one thing the Darkoath currently lack in their faction as standard, and that is something that can kill elite things. Your leaders can kill hordes, they can kill chaffy things, they can kill mid-range, but they can't go toe-to-toe with Stormcast, right? The Darkoath Wilder Fiend can just tear those guys apart. The damage is so good. This guy is such a powerful threat on the battlefield. I am a huge, huge fan of this guy, and the model is also beautiful. If I can get it up, I'll put it up now. Badoosh. Every time, Badoosh. It's so cool. Two last things to note before we head off. One, the Darkoath do not have a battle trait. They have the basic Chaos battle trait. They do not have a unique battle trait as of recording, so that's a thing you've got to bear in mind. But it also means you can ally things into the Darkoath without actually losing anything, so that's, you know, a somewhat of an advantage, I guess, compared to other factions. The other thing is that unfortunately the Darkoath Savagers don't really fit in with these guys at all. So the bespoke Darkoath, the Savagers from 1st edition, they don't gain any benefits for being in or around the regular Darkoath. And that's a real shame, especially when we saw the other day with the Thunderstrike gaining the Knight Questor, who allows them to support Questor Soulsworn. It would be nice to allow the Darkoath Savagers to gain some benefits here. On the flip side though, the Darkoath Savagers leader, the Slaughterborn, is actually a really good pick to put into the regular Darkoath, because he is an absolute beast in combat with his unbelievably good attack profile. I'll put him up now, but oh, damn, there we go. Every time. So this guy's actually a really solid ally. I'm not going to put up a list for the Darkoath because there's more Darkoath to talk about. Brands Oathbound are very interesting and they tie in with the Darkoath wonderfully. So it's worth holding off on the list until that video comes out, and there'll be lists in that video because it completes them. It's kind of wonderful, right? There's the Darkoath, the standard, are really, really cool. Once you throw in Brands Oathbound, there's some spice.
The spice. He knows about the spice.
And that's the Darkoath. I absolutely love the Darkoath. They are so cool. Their models are gorgeous. They're reusing some of their older Darkoath models like the War Queen to great effect, giving them whole new abilities, a whole new lease of life, specifically within Darkoath. What's really cool is that they made Darkoath their own faction. They didn't just lump them all in and update the Slaves to Darkness, right? The Slaves to Darkness don't get any of this stuff. So it's really nice to see that Darkoath have just carved their own little niche, whilst also allowing Slaves to Darkness to still take their Darkoath stuff separately. They have their own Warcry, they have their own Chieftain, their own Marauders, and in fact you can take the Slaves to Darkness War Queen into Darkoath and have 2 War Queens with different abilities, and that's not a bad idea, having twin queens running around causing havoc. It's kind of cool. But that's the end of this video. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for a look at the Brand Oathbound, because that really rounds out and finishes off this Darkoath saga. Let me know down below what you think of Darkoath. What's your favourite model? Have I missed something? Have I really shat on Swift Attacker a little bit too much? Let me know and we'll have a good old natter. But until next time, lads, ladies, and everybody in between and beyond, ta-ra.
Groovy.
Boy howdy, it's me, it's Toast, and we are here once again with the post-Toast credits. As always, a huge shout out to my algorithmic demon slayers, Armour Enthusiast 7, Andy Morris, CT6497, Girth Demon, The Head Knight of Paint, Heinz D, Long Run Hobbies, Lord Phylax, Sable Saber, Brioche, Steve Bean, The Houston Toad, Tough Tootin' Baby, and Velas. A huge thank you for all of your support, and I will see you all next time.